안녕하십니까 여러분 반갑습니다. I am Gypsy and you guys are watching Anxiety Av. Today we're going to discuss ways that you can impress your Korean friends and acquaintances that you meet maybe through work, maybe through school, whatever. And we do have a lot of cultural differences between Korean people and American people, but even though Korean people live in America, a lot of them are here, we don't necessarily have like a good understanding of their culture, and they don't necessarily throw their culture out when they get here to blend in better with American society. So if you want to learn more about how you can connect with those people and impress them by showing that you understand some parts of our culture, then that would probably be a really great way for you to network with them. So I thought I would share these tips with you guys. And before I get started, I just want to give a shout out to my son who made me this shirt. It says, but it actually says OOAK, which stands for one of a kind. And this is an image that he made to go on the shirt for me. So if you guys are interested in checking out some of my son's artwork, go ahead and follow him on his Instagram at Fun with Ginu. And he's also designing a bunch of stuff for my dollies to wear so that we can have matching clothes, me and my dolls. I showcase some of that stuff on my other channel, on my doll channel. So let's get started. All right, so some of this stuff is going to pertain to your personal interactions with these people. Some of them may be business interactions with them, so just keep that in mind. And it's not anything, I didn't put them in any particular order. This one is pretty basic, but it's like, you can't go wrong with this. And some of this stuff, it definitely applies to Korean people, but because a lot of Korean etiquette is kind of universal in Asia in general, you probably could get away with using these tips for other races other than Koreans as well. If they're from Asia, always take your shoes off when you go into a Korean person's house. They may not tell you you have to take it off out of politeness because they don't want to offend you or like imply that they think your shoes are dirty, but they do think your shoes are dirty. Sorry, that's just the truth. Koreans do not wear shoes inside the house because we don't want our floors to get dirty with germs from outside the house. So when we come in, we always take our shoes off, and even if you don't live there, you're expected to take your shoes off when you come inside of a Korean person's home. Don't put them in a position where they have to ask you to take your shoes off. If you have any culture, then you would know to take your shoes off. So Korean people, I think they respect you more when they don't have to kind of like tell you how to behave around them. It will give them such anxiety if you're walking around in their house with shoes, because every place you step, they're tracking in their head like where they need to deep clean after you leave, and they have to clean their floors. Like, it's just, you can't live like this. So it might be a little inconvenient, but if you know you're gonna go to a Korean person's home, make sure you're wearing clean socks, or that you don't mind showing your toes, because you're gonna have to take your shoes off if you want to be welcome there. Sometimes Korean people, like I said, they won't tell you to take your shoes off, and if you wear the shoes in the house, they'll kind of let it slide because they know Americans don't take their shoes off. But like what they think of you up here, that's gonna go down notches depending on the person, because to us, it's a given. It's like, why would you wear your shoes in the house? What is the actual reason you need to wear your shoes inside your home? Like, this is the place you're supposed to be comfortable in a house. How are you comfortable walking around with your shoes on, you know? I know some people who have like a personal rule not to ever take their shoes off until they get to their bedrooms and they're like about to sit on their bed or something like that. But you're gonna have to throw that rule out the window when you're chilling with some Korean folks. I'm sorry, okay? Yeah, but after that encounter, they'll probably never invite you over to their house again if you don't take your shoes off. So don't take this lightly, you guys. Take your shoes off when you go in their house. Another way to show respect for Korean people is to greet them. You want to always say hello, always say goodbye before you leave. And when we greet people who are a little bit older than us, we always do this. We always bow our heads a little bit. You don't have to do the entire like waist bow. That's like really, really high levels of respect, or like maybe to your grandparents. But if you're just dealing with like, you know, acquaintances, we don't expect you to bow to friends. That's like peers, that doesn't really count. But if it's somebody who's older than you, like the mother of a friend, a father of a friend, or like somebody with authority, like a church pastor or something like that, then you do want to do the slight bow with just your head. You're just nodding at them and saying hello or goodbye. And that nod is enough to show plenty respect. So we have a very like strict hierarchy system based on age in Korean culture. So you're just expected to behave more like politely and have manners when you're around people who are older than you, simply because they have more life experience than you do. And you're just showing respect for the fact that that person has lived a longer life, even if it's only by a month, even by a year, you know? So just keep that in mind. They're not gonna look at you as rude if you do the nod thing. You don't have to, but doing it is like an extra points for you, right? And kind of on the same token, I was talking about greeting your elders. So, okay, in Korean etiquette, if somebody's older than you, it's kind of your responsibility to greet them first. We're not expecting people who are older than us to go out of their way to greet us. So when I come to my aunt's house, I always say hello auntie to her first before anybody else in the house, if I can. Or whoever came and answered the door, of course. But like if my little cousins come to the door before she does, because I'm older than them, they tend to greet me first when I'm there. And then when it's time to leave, same thing. Everything goes in like age order. So the youngest people are the ones that are greeting everybody else first. And that's just manners. That's just how we do it in our society. It keeps order between people when they have this sense of like where they belong in the hierarchy. I know in America, we're all about like equal rights. Everyone's equal, and Koreans have equal rights too. But personally, societally, we don't carry ourselves like that, because when you have some level of hierarchy, it kind of just makes everyone relax. Like, it's hard for me to explain this, but like, it just makes it easier for people to fall in line with each other and not step on each other's toes. And in America, we don't have that. Like, even in our speech patterns in Korean, we end our sentences a certain way. When we're talking to people, I guess in English, the closest thing you can say is like, there's a formal way of speaking and an informal way. Those of you who speak French and Spanish, Italian, you know what I'm talking about. There's a difference between tú and usted and tú and vous, right? So those conjugations of verbs that go along with those nouns, the pronouns, you have to differentiate between the two when you're speaking to strangers or people of authority, or your elders versus people who you're familiar with. And we have that in Korean language as well, but we also have that in our culture. So it's not just our speech, it's like just built into the entire culture, our hierarchy system. And it's not like a class system where we're better than someone else because we're older than them. That's not what it is. I think in America, we get very like touchy about the idea of somebody being over someone else because we're so obsessed with the idea of being equal to everyone. But the problem with equality sometimes is that you get kind of full of yourself. Like in a situation where you should relax and let the other person lead, or take orders from someone else who knows more than you about something, Americans, their pride gets in front of them, and then they feel like, you're gonna respect me, you're not gonna tell me what to do. Like, they just get very like offended and threatened quickly when people think that there's some differentiation in their hierarchy with each other. But that's very harmful. I mean, think about it. When you come home, do your kids tell you what to do? Do your kids demand what you're gonna make for dinner? Do your children tell you when to go to bed? No. There's a hierarchy system when you come home. There's someone who's the head of that household, and then everyone else falls in line behind them, and they play their role so that there isn't chaos and mayhem in your household. And for those of you who come from a home where that wasn't in place, you know, reflect back on your childhood. You know your family was a hot mess. You guys were very dysfunctional, but there's a reason for it, you know? So to avoid all of that, just in families and in society as a whole, and communities, Koreans just respect the hierarchy system and keep it in place, you know? Even like when we go out like shopping, for example, and I'm like asking the people who work at the store to help me find stuff, I don't, like, they have name tags. I don't just call them, hey, Mary Sue. Like, I don't do that. So I'll get more into that later on in the video, but Yeah, so just remember that when you're dealing with Korean people, and probably a lot of Asian people in general, they do have a hierarchy system, and you got to figure out where you fit into that system when you're dealing with those people, because there is a place for you somewhere in there, but off the rip, you're not going to know exactly what that is. So to be safe, a general rule is just greet the elders first. Anybody who looks older than you, just greet them first. This one's a really cool one and very subtle. I don't know if you guys have ever been around Korean people when they see you off, like when you're leaving the premises. If you came to their house or their job or something like that, if they're able to do so, they will walk you outside to your car and like wave you away when you're going, right? That's part of our culture. When people are leaving us, we always like follow them as far from our house as we can get away with going. So if it's just to the door, like maybe you have a baby in the house or something, that's fine. If it's all the way to the car in the driveway, that's fine too. You're not gonna follow them home, of course. That doesn't make any sense. But like until they leave your property, we normally will stay outside with them and then see them go away. And if you're dropping the person off, we normally don't drive away or leave the premises until the person made it inside their house. So that's really subtle thing. I think Korean people a lot of times do this subconsciously just because they've grown up with it, but it is part of the etiquette to see your visitors off. And so if they come and visit you at your house, make sure you're walking them to the door. Like it's not a situation where you're just sitting at the dining room table and they're like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna leave now. And then you're like, okay, bye, safe trip. No, you should get up from your spot and walk them out. And usually it's the head of the household that walks the person out, or it could be like the youngest person in the household that walks the person out. Sometimes the head of the household will tell like the youngest member of the family, like, hey, go walk this person out to the door, like make sure they get to their car safely. And that someone from the family normally comes out to see that person off. So just do that. That's a really cool way to impress Korean people, and they will really look at you differently when you're doing that, because that means a lot to us to be seen off by our friends. Here's another one. So Korean people, we bond through food. We bond by eating meals together. So if a Korean person invites you to eat with them, that's like a huge honor. And especially if you're like being invited to like a family function and they allow you to eat with them, that's their way of kind of bringing you into their circles. So if you like watch a lot of Korean dramas, you'll see that like people who work together at certain companies, they'll take time to go and eat meals together at restaurants, and like the boss is there and like all the employees are there. And that's kind of just part of our tradition to like make memories over food, you know, talking and chatting over food. It's how we bond. So if a Korean person invites you to eat with them, do it. Go eat with them. And also while you're eating, try really hard to not be like picky, because a lot of the foods that we eat, the banchan that we have on the table, which is like our side dishes, they can be really strange looking things that you've probably never seen before, but most of it is just raw vegetables that's been like sauteed or like marinated in certain kinds of sauces and spices, and they're usually healthy things. The only time I question the food myself is if there's pork products in it, because Koreans eat a lot of pork, and I don't always know what kind of meats are in some things, so I'll ask the person who cooked the food or like the family members, like, yeah, just point out the things that are pork so that I won't eat those things, but everything else I can eat. So as long as you're being clear and you're not just being picky for the sake of being picky, they won't be offended. But whatever you do decide to eat, try your best to eat all of it. Like only take a little bit of things if you don't know if you want to eat it or not. Just take a bite so you can try it. But Koreans get so impressed when people eat our food, because our food is so strange to them that it makes us feel like we're weird when we're around them, because we like to eat this stuff like kimchi. I remember when kimchi was like, you couldn't bring out kimchi. Like you couldn't even open the fridge if you had kimchi inside and you had American people over your house, because they couldn't handle the smell of the kimchi. It's like so strong, the fermentation of the cabbage. So you'd always get like these faces and bad reactions from people when you pull out the kimchi, right? Now, because of K-pop and Korean dramas, like our food is more popular and more well-known. It's almost like on the same pedestal with Japanese food these days. So even though people know it's like strange to them, they don't have the same reactions that they used to have where they would just overtly be like, ew, what is that? They don't really do that anymore, so that's a good thing. But so Koreans aren't as self-conscious as they used to be about their food, but we still are. So if you eat the food, like, you're gonna gain lots and lots of points because it shows that you're being open-minded. It shows that you're like embracing our culture, and we feel comfortable around Americans who we can just be Korean around and not have to like almost code switch almost into becoming more Americanized when we're around them. And while you're at it, try to eat with the chopsticks. Try to learn how to eat with chopsticks. Koreans love when you ask them how to use chopsticks because we hate watching people use them bad. Like, have you guys ever watched like movies? Sometimes the actors are like eating with chopsticks in a scene where they're eating Chinese food, but they're always holding it wrong. Like, they hold the chopsticks so close to the bottom of the chopsticks instead of at the top. So let me know in the comments if you guys want me to show you a demonstration of how to use chopsticks properly. But yeah, that's like a pet peeve of a lot of Korean people. We'll just be like, don't even bother. Like, just eat with the fork, okay? And I think the reason why we prefer chopsticks is because a fork to us, I mean, think about it. A fork looks like a really small pitchfork. It just seems kind of barbaric to like stab your food and eat it. Like that, I don't know, that whole thing just doesn't seem like classy. So I think a lot of Asian people who use chopsticks, they just prefer to use the chopsticks even when they're eating American food. But my husband, he'll eat macaroni and cheese with chopsticks. Like, he eats almost everything with chopsticks once he got used to using them, and he's left-handed, so it's harder to use them with left hand, but it is what it is. So, okay, here's a major thing that I think is probably the biggest clash between Korean culture and American culture. In America, we have this expectation that if you are being serious when you're talking to someone and you're not telling them a bunch of bullshit, you should look them in the eye. I have Asperger's syndrome, so it's really difficult for me to concentrate on like looking at somebody in the eye. I've been practicing doing that more and more with videos by trying really hard to look into the viewfinder, but it's still difficult even though it's not a real eye. It's just painful for me to do it, but if you don't have Asperger's, then it should not really affect you like that. So in America, we have this thing where we have to look you in the eye when we're talking to you and being serious. But in Korean etiquette, it's actually very rude to look somebody right in the face when you're talking to them. So most people who have grown up here or lived in America a long time dealing with a lot of American people, they don't get hung up on this as much. If you are really trying to accept the cultural difference, then it shouldn't be that difficult of a challenge to try to avert your gaze as much as you can from people looking them in the eye. Occasionally you can look them in the face, but Koreans don't really like it when people like stare them in the face while they're talking to them. So we kind of just look around or look down when we're talking to them, but looking down is a sign of respect when you're talking to someone who's older than you or has authority. Look, especially those people, like your friends, it really doesn't matter. Like your peers, doesn't really matter. But if you're talking to someone who's above you in station, you should be looking down when you're speaking to them rather than right in their eye, because they take that as a challenge of authority when you do that. And it's considered very rude, especially children, young people like in their teens, just very young people like 20 and under. Very, very rude to look them right in the face. And especially when you have a conflict with a Korean person, like maybe it's your aunt, maybe it's your boss. If you have a conflict and you're trying to squash that conflict, you absolutely should never look them in the eye, because they will assume that everything you're saying is a challenge if you're already disagreeing with each other. So keep that in mind. If you married a Korean person and you have children with them, train your children to not look their parents in the eye when they're being scolded or when they're being talked to, because that parent is going to get really offended and take it personal that their children are looking at them that way. And because those kids may be growing up in a Western society, maybe the Korean parent doesn't feel comfortable educating them on those cultural differences, because it's like, well, it's only like that to me. You're a part American, we live in America, and you're just doing it the American way. So it's not right for me to tell you that I take it very offensive when you look me in the eye. But I mean, it is what it is. That's how we were raised. So if you're in that predicament, try not to look the person in the eye as much as you can. especially during conflicts, but just in general, we just try not to do that. It doesn't mean you're lying. Like, it doesn't mean you're being dishonest or lying. This is what Americans love to do. They'll be like, if you're telling the truth, well, then you look me in the eye and you tell me that. And if the person can't look you in the eye and tell you, then they just assume, well, just because you're lying, you can't face me. Yeah, it's like a psychological thing, body language, but it only works here. Like, in Asia, we don't do that. You know what I'm saying? Whether I'm telling you the truth or lying to you, I don't look you in the eye either way. Okay, as I stated before, because we bond over food very much, when you invite Asian people over to your house, I suggest that you should always offer them like a glass of water. It doesn't have to be some fancy drink, because a lot of times Koreans don't drink a lot of the sweet stuff that Americans obsess over, like soda and juice. That's not really a thing in Korean food palates. Like, we don't like extremely sweet foods. So if you have little snacks or something, like chips or something like that, it's like more savory, salty kind of stuff. They like that kind of stuff. And fruits, like fresh fruits, oranges, bananas, watermelons. Koreans love watermelons. Like, I think Korean people like watermelon more than so-called black people do. I don't know why we have that stereotype here, but Koreans, they love them some watermelons, okay? And water. Just offer them a cup of cold water. It's the polite thing to do. I think Americans also do this, but for some reason, I remember growing up hearing a lot from my black family members not to eat when you go to other people's houses and they offer you food. It's considered rude, or like, I don't know, because you're like eating up their resources that's for their family or something. I don't know what it is. I don't know why we do this, but I've heard it many, many times growing up. Now, I don't know if white people do this either, but I know in the black community for sure, there's some kind of understanding we're not supposed to eat at other people's homes. So I don't know. I think out of politeness, they might maybe offer you food, but I think you're always supposed to like turn it down. Am I right or am I wrong about this, you guys? Maybe it's just my black family, but I feel like I've heard this many times over the years growing up. And I used to tell my kids not to eat food at other people's houses, but that's because we don't eat pork. And a lot of people eat pork. So I don't know what kind of food they're offering my children. And I don't know that my kids can tell the difference between pork and other foods, or would even think to ask, like, is that pork in there? So that's the main reason why I would tell my children not to eat at other people's homes, even if they offered them food. If it wasn't porky food, like if it was like popsicles, then yeah, you can eat a popsicle. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, that's me. But like, just in general, Korean people, they tend to offer each other food when they come over each other's houses. And at the very least, the basic is like a drink. Do you want some water? You know what I'm saying? So in my culture, the polite thing to do is to just give it to them. You don't necessarily ask them, do you want this? We just pour the water and we'll just give it to them. It's just there for them if they want it or not, you know? And usually they'll take it. So I think especially if the person's like older than you, it's really considered kind of rude to like ask them, do you want a snack? We just pull it out and we'll just be like, hey, have some of this, try this. And we'll just put it in front of them. And that's a way to show respect. So here's like a real funky one. I told you guys earlier, we have this hierarchy system in our language and our culture, right? But another thing that we do is we do not call each other by name. Like in Korean culture, unless they're your friend, they're your peer, and they're in the same age group or the same grade as you, like the equivalent of that. Unless it's somebody like that who you're very familiar with, you don't call the person by their name. So even between couples, you'll see like the wife and husband calling each other yabo a lot, which means like darling, or like, it's just a word that spouses use to call each other by that isn't their actual names. So you'll hear that a lot in Korean culture. And of course, with people calling each other 언니, 오빠, 누나, and hyung, those are titles that we give to older siblings. It just means big brother or big sister. If you're a male, you're gonna call an older woman 누나 and an older man hyung. And if you are a female, the older woman is 언니 and the older man is 오빠, right? But we also do this outside our families. So all of my cousins who are younger than me, every single one of them, they call me 언니, they call me 누나, they never call me by my name. My younger sister also calls me 언니. And people who I'm not related to by blood that are younger than me, that are part of the Korean culture, they also call me 언니 and 누나. And like, you can put their name in front of the title, like like Minyong Imo, like that's how I call my aunts. I always call them by their name and the word aunt next to it. But like my younger cousins, they don't even call their aunts with their names. Like that's how I differentiate between my aunts, because I have 4 of them. So we always grew up calling them like Minyang Imo, Suyong Imo, like we put their names in front of their title. But my younger cousins, they call them Kun Imo, Jagan Imo, like they call them big aunt, little aunt, like they just go in the order that they were born in rather than say their names, because it's kind of disrespectful in Korean culture for you to call someone who is above you in station by their name. In my case, my aunts don't consider it rude because we always grew up differentiating between them with their name. And even my uncle, like we called him like Hongbe Samchun, like which means his name. Like I do with my Uncle Benny, you know, like I do that with my American family members too. It depends on like the household, I guess, because in some households they're really rigid about not calling anybody by their names. I don't really know exactly why Koreans are so offended by people calling them by their names, but it's usually people who are like a station below them. You're not supposed to call them by their name. So if it's your boss, rather than calling him Jerry, call him Mr. Jerry or like Mr. Che, like instead of saying him just his name, because Koreans really get offended when people use their names and they're not familiar with them. They're not like their friend. You know what I'm saying? If they're younger than you, it doesn't matter. But if the person is older than you, has a higher station than you, or as a person of authority, you should always call them by a title. So like my husband, when he's around my family members, he always calls them by the same title that I give to them. So like my mom, he calls her Amma instead of like her name. My aunts, he calls them Imo, which means auntie. And like Imo Boo for my aunt's husbands, that's what we call our aunt's husband, instead of, it's like uncle-in-law kind of. So he calls them all by the same titles that I call them by. People who are older than him, that are men, that are Korean men, he always calls them hyung, because it's just a sign of respect. He just shows them respect in that way based on their own culture rather than doing it the American way. And they're way more accepting of him because he does this, and he just assimilates himself into our culture when he's around us. So that goes a long way. Like, I don't know, it's just something about the speech etiquette that we have in Korean culture. Everything is based on respect in our culture. So it's almost like, because we just by default do things a certain way to show respect, if you're being disrespectful, it's not even there's no way you could be misunderstood. It's not a situation where people are like, oh, he accidentally did that. No, it's like you have to be trying to break the rules to disrespect somebody in Korean culture. So it's very visible when you're being disrespectful. So if you guys are hanging out with a lot of Asian people and you don't want to like accidentally disrespect them, try really hard to not call them by their names. Ask them for a title you can call them by, or like copy the same titles you see other people calling them by, or ask them like, why do you call them that? Like I have a friend, my friend Jackie, who is Filipina, and I told you guys about her before, and she has a lot of friends from our job that we had together where we met, and a lot of those women are older Filipino women, and she always calls them ate something, which means like, I think ate means like older sister or aunt or something like that. I don't speak Tagalog, so I don't know what it means, but I know it's a title, you know what I'm saying? But even when she's talking to me about one of our friends, she always says like, oh, I saw ate somebody, and she's coming over to the party, and like she always refers to them that way because that's her way of showing respect to them. So she's Filipina, and I get that they do that because in Asian cultures in general, I feel like we have this thing where we try to be as respectful as possible to the people around us. And one way to show that is by calling them by a title. You feel me? Okay, and then here's one that might seem like a no-brainer, but if Korean people offer you something, just take it, even if it's not something you need. Like, if they offer you some food, if they offer you a ride, if they offer you some money, if they offer you a gift of some kind, just take it, even if you don't need it. Unless it's something you really you have no use for and it's gonna go to waste and you think somebody else could better benefit from that, that's different. But for the most part, if it's just like something basic, like, you know, they're like, oh, I have a bunch of extra blankets in my house I don't need. Do you guys need some extra blankets? Like, just take it. The reason why is because in our culture, when somebody offers you something, if you refuse to accept their offer, they will kind of like look at that like, oh, that person doesn't need anything. So if I'm offering them stuff and they're denying it, it must be because they really don't need help and they are almost like offended or insulted that you're offering them something because they don't want to be looked at as some kind of beggar. And Korean people don't look at you like a beggar because you took something from them. But I think in American culture, we're very like, I don't know, kind of like not really accepting of people's like charity, I guess. I don't know why. I don't know why Americans do a lot of the things that we do. Like we have like these weird like polite mannerisms that we have, like asking someone how they're doing when you greet them, and then we just automatically answer, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. We never say like, yeah, I got diagnosed with cancer next week, I don't know how much time I have left to live. Nobody answers like that, you know what I'm saying? But in Korean culture, we don't have those like weird pleasantries, like we don't have that. So if somebody offers you something, it's because they care about you, they're thinking about you, and they thought this thing, I can part with this thing to give to this person. Like, is that what it is? Americans think if I accept your gift, I'm taking away from you, and like, I don't want you to go without. Maybe that's why we don't accept stuff from people, but I look at it like if I needed it, I wouldn't have offered it to you. So like, what? You know? But yeah, so Korean people, they take it as a compliment when you accept their gifts. And even if it's something as like basic as like a picture that they drew or something, like it doesn't matter what it is. Just accepting it kind of like makes them feel like you are appreciative of them. And down the line, if you really need something, those are gonna be the core people that would like come to your rescue the fastest, the people that have offered you things and you accepted it from them. If you're stranded on the side of a road, like those are normally the guys you can call and be like, hey, I got stuck in the middle of traffic and something happened, my car broke down. Can you come get me? Like those people will come and help you, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, there's a lot of layers to it, but the bottom line is it just looks better for you to take the gift rather than say you don't want it, because it looks kind of ungrateful that they offered you something, but you just didn't want to take it because maybe it wasn't good enough for you, or who knows how the person would take it. But it's just safer for you to not let them misunderstand that interaction by just accepting the gift. Like I've had Korean people give me stuff that I really didn't need, and then later on, something will happen where I totally could make use of this thing that they gave me, and then it works out because I have it. So it's like almost like better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it type of a situation. And in some cases, people have given me things that I didn't need at the time, but then I'll run into someone else who might need this thing, and I'm like, oh shoot, somebody just gave me this last week and I don't need it. Do you want it? And I'll give it to those people, and I've been able to help people that way. Okay, so we got two more things for you. One is playing yourself down. Like if somebody gives you a compliment, okay, for example, in my case, if like when I'm around Korean people and we're doing like karaoke, they'll just come up to me and be like, oh my God, you have a beautiful voice. Wow, you're such a great singer. And instead of saying, yeah, I know, right? Like, why am I not famous yet? Like, instead of doing that, I'm always like, oh no, my voice is so raspy. Oh my God, I had a cold and I was getting over it. I sound horrible. Like, I need to practice more. I could do better if I practice. That's how I'll respond, because if you respond like, girl, I know, right? You know what I'm saying? Like my son, he draws really well, and people will see his stuff and be like, oh my God, like you are a really phenomenal artist. But he never says, yeah, I'm the shit. Can you believe I'm 15? Like he never responds like that. He's always very humble, and he's like, oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm still learning. Like that's how he responds, because I've trained him to do that. But like Korean people, they look at you like you're stuck up if you accept their compliment with way too much like eagerness and you're going along with complimenting yourself with them. They look at you like you're like full of yourself. So they'll start to look down on you a little bit. But if you become really humble and you're like, oh, stop complimenting me, I'm horrible, I'm so ugly. Like if you do that, they will look at you like, oh my God, they're so modest. What a wonderful person. And they'll brag on you even harder to everybody else, you know? So you don't have to like prove your own reputation. Like other people will do it for you kind of. And the fact that you're not just so egocentrical like Kanye West will make people like you more. And that's why we play ourselves down. It's not because we have low self-esteem. Like freaking, I swear to God, like Americans, they think if you say anything negative about yourself, you're like bringing yourself down. It says a lot about your society and how people like interpret certain behaviors. But in our society, there's a lot of excellence in the Korean society as a whole. And if you're constantly bragging on yourself, it's like you're not the only person who knows how to do this. So good for you. You know what I'm saying? You got a lot of competition amongst other Korean people. But yeah, so that's why we don't do that. And the last thing, I know this seems so freaking like duh, but it's really not duh, because I've been around so many people who have trouble with this, which is being clean. Be clean and smell good. Like, if you invite Korean people over to your house, make sure your house looks clean, because Koreans are not the people that you can go, ignore the mess. Oh, I'm sorry, my house is a little messy. I need to clean it up. Unless it's immaculate, that's the only time you should be saying that to a Korean person. If your house really is a mess and it's dust everywhere and like just messy, like Korean people, they're like they're cringy when it comes to dirt, germs. They hate it. So like, don't invite them to your house unless you cleaned your house. And don't be around them if you're not put together. Like Korean people, they will notice when your hair is unkempt, when your clothes aren't ironed, when you're like smelling like body odor, like sweaty. Like they always notice that stuff. And even if they don't say it to your face, they will talk about it afterwards. Like they'll talk to their family members about you and be like, oh God, he stank. Like you can't go around him that often, you know? So be mindful of like your breath, like brush your teeth before you go around them. Eat some gum, like something. Koreans are the kind of people that are like close talkers. They be all up in your face. They be all in your personal space when they're talking to you. We don't have that. I don't know what it is, but like Korean people, maybe it's because it's a small country and it's very crowded with a lot of people there, but we don't have that same sense of like privacy that Americans just take for granted. So don't be surprised if you go to like a Korean church and all the ajumas, all the like the women are like congregating around you. They're bringing you food, like trying to put it in your mouth with their hands. Like that's just how they are, you know. They're very like communal type people. So unless they're very indoctrinated by the American way, a lot of them just do that by instinct. The older they are, the more they do this. So it's not unusual to see Korean people taking showers more than one time in a day. And I feel like Americans, they're like, well, I took one this morning, or I'll take one later tonight. Like that's enough. For a lot of Americans, or like they'll brush their teeth one time in the day and then that's good enough for the entire day. But in Korean culture, no, like every moment that you have a chance to clean yourself, you clean yourself. Every chance you have a moment to clean your house, you clean. You mop, you do the dishes. Like you do dishes after every single meal, not after all the dishes piled up for the day and you throw it all in the dishwasher. Like Koreans just have a different way of looking at cleaning things and cleaning their bodies when it comes to their personal hygiene and stuff like that. So when you're around Korean people and you're like a little rank, like don't think they don't notice. Don't think they're not realizing that you stink. You need to do something about it. The level of disheveledness that I think Americans can tolerate is much, much higher than Korean people can. And there's a big difference, man. There's a big difference. Like the kinds of stankness that we will tolerate as Americans. Oh man, especially people who have pets. Like if you go to their house and there's just pet fur everywhere and you can smell the odor of the dog or the cat, there's just no denying if this person has pets as soon as you walk through the door. Like I've been to American people's homes where that is the case and it stands out to me and I feel very uncomfortable there. But like that's because I was raised by a Korean mom who was so meticulous about these kinds of things. And my mom is considered messy compared to most Korean people. Like she married a black guy. He didn't have really high standards for her housekeeping. You know what I'm saying? And it's kind of funny because like my dad's mom, we have this inside joke in our family that she's a neat freak because she was a germaphobe and she would make us constantly sanitize every freaking surface in our house, the bathroom, like everything all day. When we were children and we would go visit my grandma, bro, like your whole visit is consistent of cleaning the house. Like that's what she would make us do. And she was obsessed with it, you know? So I feel like maybe that's why my dad was very laid back about cleaning, because he was just so traumatized by his mom being like overly clean. But Korean people, shoot, they would be very comfortable in my grandmom's house because she was so meticulous about it. And my dad, he took like 3 showers a day just on default. He just did, you know what I'm saying? So he kind of like, he was right at home when he went to Korea. He didn't have no problem getting along with people or assimilating himself into the culture and marrying a Korean, having Korean kids. And at home, it was like we lived in Korea, even when we lived in America, if you know what I'm saying, right? This is a huge thing. That's why I left it for the last one, because I want you guys to understand how important it is for Korean people to know that the people who they're associating with are clean. They don't want to smell your body parts, okay? So like a little spritz of cologne and just, you know, or perfume. Don't go overboard, because I feel like Koreans are also very adverse to chemical smells. They hate it. And they're very like sensitive to it. They can smell the chemicals that other people probably aren't even paying attention to. My mom, she hates chemicals so much that she doesn't even wash her dishes with regular dish detergent. Like, if she can get away with washing it with just hot water and a sponge, she'll do that. I mean, she'll get this Mexican soap that doesn't have these harsh like chemicals in it and there's no suds. She'll use that to wash her dishes because that's how much she hates chemicals. In America, especially now with this whole COVID thing, like we're like obsessed with like sanitizers and, you know, Lysol and all of this stuff, you know, but like Koreans, they don't really do all of that. Like they're not really all into all the chemicals, but they are into being clean. So, you know, use shampoo, whatever, but like the usual hygiene routine. But I mean, especially when you know that you're gonna be around your Korean friends, go over and above and beyond what you normally would, because they will notice your smells and they will notice that you don't look clean. Like Koreans, they notice this too. See, when you look at somebody's eyes right here in the corners of their eye, right? Sometimes people have like, you know, like built up dirt or something just like stuck in their eyes. We actually have a name for that dirt. It's called 눈곱 in Korean, but like I've never even heard a term for that in English. But that's how clean they are. Like even that, they don't want to see that. They don't want it to be there. Like it's the first thing they notice about your face if you have anything out of place. You know what I'm saying? I hope these tips helped you guys to learn a little bit more. Maybe what you're doing wrong around your Asian friends. You don't know why they seem so standoffish, or like what it is you're doing that seems to rub them the wrong way, but you're not getting invited to their homes more than once, or, you know, they're not coming over to your house. Like this is why, okay? And if you master these things, then you will attract a lot of Asian, especially Korean friends quicker than you probably would if you weren't doing this stuff, because everyone wants to feel comfortable. You want to be comfortable. That's why Black Lives Matter. That's why it's such a huge deal right now that people are being acknowledged for who they are. You know, Black people want to feel free to blast our hip hop music and not be looked at as ignorant or thugs because we like our music. You know what I'm saying? That's not what the whole BLM movement is about. Imagine, can you imagine if that's what it was about? But I'm saying, like, I'm just using I'm just trying to use an analogy that everybody can kind of like understand. But yeah, but we want to be free to do that. Same thing with Koreans. They want to feel free to eat your spaghetti with chopsticks. You know what I'm saying? So that's all. But anyways, well, you definitely have a Korean friend in me. So at least you can say you have one or a half, whatever. And like this video if any of this stuff sounds useful to you. And leave me a comment if you think of something else that you want to hear more about as far as like Asian or Korean culture. And let me know if any of this stuff works for you, if you try it. And what kind of reactions you're getting from your Korean friends when you try this stuff out. If you are Korean and you're watching this and you can think of something else that's like a huge pet peeve of yours that Americans are always doing around you that you can't stand, and why, leave that in the comments because people want to know. And I want to know. And that's it for today. So thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me again on Anxiety Av. And again, shout out to my son Ginu for this really cool shirt that he made for me. And I'll be getting a lot of wear out of this shirt for sure. So you guys might see it again. My name's Gypsy. Be sure to follow me on Instagram if you're not already. And I will see you in the next one right here on Anxiety Av. Ciao. 할머니 어렸을 때
응.
크면은 뭐 되고 싶었어?
나? 몰라. 잃어버렸어.
그래?
응.
미국에 와보고 싶었어?
와보고 싶었으니까 왔지.
그래? 근데 좋아? 어디가 더 좋아? 한국이 좋아? 미국이 좋아?
아, 친척이 있으니까 좋지.
그래. 또 다른 나라 가보고 싶어?
아니야.
근데 동양 나라 딴 데 가봤어? 일본?
안 가봤어.
중국?
응.
중국에 가봤어?
안 가봤어.
왜?
누가 데려가야지 가지.
가깝잖아.
갖고 가 돈이 들잖아.
제주도는 가봤잖아.
제주도는 우리나라 아니야.
근데 거기도 비행기 타고 가야지 되잖아.